Do you know anything what's going on in Boyle Heights?
No.
Boyle Heights
East
is
LA, right?
Yeah, it's East LA, and apparently the hipsters are starting to open up artisanal coffee shops and art galleries there, and they're not having it. And
so the neighborhood's pushing back.
It's more than that. There's a lot of videos. It's like straight up racist. It's anti-white racism, which is apparently totally acceptable, even if cameras are blaring in your face.
Mariachi Square is the heart of Boyle Heights, a solidly Hispanic neighborhood that in the past saw waves of immigrants.
There was Irish and Italians, Jewish, Russians, Japanese, you name it. They all lived here. This was like a Ellis Island of the West.
The latest wave is wealthier, mostly white artists and professionals attracted by proximity to downtown LA and public transit. Their art galleries, shops, and gourmet cafes have been popping up steadily. Sandra Teo's family has run this tailor shop, the Casa de Mariachi, for more than 30 years.
It's changing here a lot. We don't see the same people here that we used to. Our rent has gone up because the landlords notice that people with money are coming in. It's inevitable. One of these days, we won't be here anymore.
It's a process of cultural as well as physical erasure.
Eventually, the mom-and-pop store that might have been unique to this neighborhood disappears. So the uniqueness to the neighborhood, the culture of the neighborhood is getting lost.
The end result is a racist process of displacement. We're talking about a larger systemic process, a larger institutional process where city government, foundations, large corporations are taking over land to increase value in property and to change the shape of the city.
In the first Los Angeles, in the years before World War II, the Boyle Heights section of East Los Angeles, just across the river from downtown, was a center, really the center of Jewish culture in Los Angeles. As second Los Angeles dawned, the neighborhood was really isolated from the rest of the city and region by a tangle of new freeways. Freeways were being built all over the region, of course, but nowhere were they rammed through a neighborhood with the intensity and really the violence that happened in Boyle Heights. Over time, though, in second Los Angeles, in the post-war decades, that isolation actually proved to be a surprising source of strength for the neighborhood. It became an enclave of Latin American and in particular Mexican American immigration. And by the 70s and 80s, it had really become a settled neighborhood, not of newcomers, but of second and even third generation immigrants, and a neighborhood that really had a strong sense of itself and its identity. And what that's meant now, as people and interest and money move east, and gentrification is at Boyle Heights' doorstep, is that the neighborhood has been able to fight back against the forces of change much more effectively and with a lot more unity than other neighborhoods around the region. And the question is, what will become of one of the surprising cultural success stories of second Los Angeles in this new city with development and money pouring in from all corners?
So, people are talking about gentrification, but they often mean different things when they use the term. Gentrification is a process of neighborhood change that includes economic change in a historically disinvested neighborhood by means of real estate investment and new, higher-income residents moving in, as well as demographic change, not only in terms of income level, but also in terms of changes in the education level or racial makeup of residents. Gentrification is complex and needs some explaining. To understand it, there are three key things to consider: the historic conditions, especially policies and practices that made communities susceptible to gentrification, the way that central city disinvestment and investment patterns are taking place today as a result of these conditions, and the ways that gentrification impacts communities. Over the last century, many policies and practices have created racialized patterns of disinvestment in city centers that have left low-income communities of color particularly susceptible to gentrification. From the 1930s through the late 60s, standards set by the federal government and carried out by banks explicitly labeled neighborhoods home to predominantly people of color as risky and unfit for investment. This practice, now known as redlining, meant that people of color were denied access to loans that would enable them to buy or repair homes in their neighborhood. Other housing and transportation policies of the mid-20th century fueled the growth of mostly white suburbs and the exodus of capital from urban centers, in a phenomenon often referred to as white flight. Take the GI Bill as an example. The program guaranteed low-cost mortgage loans for returning World War II soldiers, but discrimination limited the extent to which black veterans were able to purchase homes in the growing suburbs. In fact, the Federal Housing Administration largely required that suburban developers agree to not sell houses to black people in order for the developers to access these guaranteed loans. Left behind in central city neighborhoods, low-income households and communities of color bore the brunt of highway system expansion and urban renewal programs, which resulted in the mass clearance of homes, businesses, and neighborhood institutions, and set the stage for widespread public and private disinvestment in the decades that followed. In more recent history, the foreclosure crisis also contributed to neighborhood-level vulnerability to gentrification. In low-income communities of color, disproportionate levels of subprime lending resulted in mass foreclosure, leaving those neighborhoods vulnerable to investors seeking to purchase and flip homes in bulk.
Denver's rapid changing landscape continues to spark outrage from longtime residents, especially in neighborhoods like 5 Points, where now they are going after Mayor Michael Hancock in a gentrification summit. Denver 7 reporter Eric Lufer was there, and Eric, it was a sign that really got people fired up.
Well, and it's a sign that you've most likely seen or at least heard about. Last November, Inc. Coffee set this sign outside on the sidewalk in 5 Points, happily gentrifying the neighborhood since 2014, it read. That sparked protests and now full-on summits where residents are coming together to fight back.
It wasn't just about a sign. This is about equity and equal access in our city for everyone.
Local officials! Residents of 5 Points and other historic Denver neighborhoods have been awakened.
Gentrification is not a joke. Kicking out African Americans and Hispanics and Latinos and black and brown, etc., out of their homes is not a joke.
Gentrification was front and center inside a packed Denver church today for the summit.
The entire mentality that gentrification is progress is totally wrong.
That term, to this group, just means a formal way of getting pushed out.
I'm beyond angry. I've got a lot of cuss words. I could tell you more descriptively how I feel.
A booming city of Denver seems to have many people feeling left behind.
I think that generally developers have had a free-for-all and things have really gotten out of control without concern for being sure that people aren't involuntarily displaced.
Mayor Michael Hancock is getting the brunt of the attacks.
I'd like to see the mayor resign early.
And coming back to Denver and seeing the real lack of leadership that he's demonstrating has been disappointing for me.
The mayor got out in front of today's summit a couple days ago, holding his own Facebook Live forum about this very issue.
Folks have been challenged and frustrated by housing. And by the way, this is personal. I've got family members who, my own children have said, what's going on here?
The mayor saying a lot of what is happening started well before he took office.
If you look at some of our neighborhoods like 5 Points, you would see, in Curtis Park, you will see that these neighborhoods began to shift back in the 1990s. And there hasn't been a solution that's been able to be brought forward to curtail it.
Why? Why on earth would anybody think that this was a good idea?
Andy Todaro saw the sandwich board sign yesterday, one side bragging about gentrification, the other side stating nothing says gentrification like being able to order a cortado.
As a piece of advertising, as a piece of marketing outside of your place of business, seems pretty tone deaf.
Tone deaf because when it comes to tension over a rapidly changing Denver, this neighborhood is ground zero.
It's a lot happening all at once.
The owner of Crema Coffee across the street says with all the development, the vibrant Rhino Arts District is changing fast. In these historically African American and Latino neighborhoods, old and new are next door and sometimes clashing.
A lot of people that have been here for a long time can't afford to live here anymore. So people are feeling already disenfranchised. So this just makes them feel even more disenfranchised. And more so that they're not even being considered while being disenfranchised.
You have been conquered. Whole Foods has arrived.
At
kind of feels like it's the nail in the coffin as far as gentrification goes and like the changes that have been happening in Harlem.
It looks nice and clean. I mean, I can't see nothing bad about it. It just, everybody feels like it's a new turning point.
Seeing that this Whole Foods is here, especially on 125th Street out of all places, it just shows that there's a real change here.
Literally nothing but liquor stores and fast food restaurants. So to actually have something that's wholesome and is healthy, I feel like was definitely needed for this area.
It's needed, but it was also needed 20 years ago.
They waited until Harlem got significantly white before they chose to put food that we could eat here.
Healthy options, but it's not really in a price range that I can afford and still be able to pay my rent.
I was so happy to see Whole Foods come uptown, and I hope we have some good sales, but today was the first time I paid $2.49 for sweet potatoes.
My strawberry $1 box, same way, same container is $4. People buy from here, but not here.
Isn't there a thing called the Whole Foods effect?
We have a saying in Harlem. This is the east side area known as River West area.
We asked Deshay to show us his neighborhood, how he sees it, to be vulnerable and honest with us. It was up to him what to show us, where to go, and what to talk about. He remembers being friends with his neighbors, but now,
I don't know nobody no more.
because of what he describes as forces beyond his control.
I would say it is a gentrification thing. You come across Holden this way, east, you don't really see too many black families no more. This block, it had, like I say, a lot of ethnic backgrounds on this block. And all the kids, they played with each other, no matter if you was black, white, blue, green, purple.
It's like he's a stranger in his own neighborhood. But you
like this neighborhood, you know? Yeah, I was finna say, this ain't no bad neighborhood to live in.
But as he looks across the city,
I love it.
His city, with his old neighborhood in the background, he gets inspired to make things better.
I'm working on a non-profit organization. I basically want to do it for the kids, where I can maybe feed the homeless and have some of the neighborhood kids come help me, you know, just to get things going.
While that's still in the works, Deshay is also part of a one-man beautification team.
Across the bridge.
He's always picking up trash from the side of the road.
Then I just started doing it. Just picking up the trash, you know?
Even if it's not the neighborhood he grew up in, it's still his neighborhood. And a good neighbor always takes care of their block. I asked Deshay one final question. If there was anything left he wanted to say.
I love my hood, man. When it all sums down, all boils down to it. That's the only thing I can say, man. I love my neighborhood, man.
Boston's Chinatown, which is home to roughly 12,000 people, is experiencing a luxury housing boom that is pushing up rents in the area. This condo, the Kensington, charges more than $4,000 for a one-bedroom apartment. Many of the existing immigrant inhabitants are facing eviction to make way for new construction or higher-paying tenants.
On the main street of Chinatown, they start to raise the rent, and some of the maybe older, smaller business get pushed out. And even for residential, I can see that every time I talk to customers, they say getting harder and harder to live in Chinatown because the rent keep going up.
Activist Karen Chen is fighting to keep housing affordable and has helped form a new Chinatown Land Trust that she hopes will have a say in what gets built in the area.
The community built, Chinatown. And now that because of all this influx of luxury development, we're being pushed out. And then, the community is here to say, no, hell no, we won't go.
The Chinese Historical Society of New England is trying to get some buildings designated as historic to save them from the wrecking ball. And the city says it is committed to preserving Chinatown. But Leong says the city needs to stop offering developers tax breaks and zoning allowances. If they don't, he fears the area will lose its character.
Al Whitaker loves to play with his black lab, Thurgood, in the front yard of his 6-bedroom home in Brockton.
It's a lot of house, but for the price, it was worth it.
The house is a mixed blessing for Whitaker, who lived in Roxbury for more than a decade and hoped to buy a home there.
It was just a wonderful, ideal place to live. There were parks for the kids, there was green space. Unfortunately, when I started to look to purchase, we were talking in the stratosphere, $600,000-$700,000 easily.
The Massachusetts Association of Realtors says the average price of a single-family home in Roxbury is about $680,000, but a single family in Brockton is less than half that amount.
This is one of the houses I sold here.
Eva Andrade is a Brockton real estate agent.
Last year I sold about maybe 10 homes to people from Boston.
And what is that, a high number? Is that a good number?
It is a high number because majority of my business is in Brockton.
She says most people would have preferred to stay in Boston.
But once they look to compare between Boston and Brockton, Brockton has much more home for what they're paying compared to Boston.
That may be good for Andrade's business, but Boston City Councilor Kim Janey says it's not good for Roxbury.
I grew up in this house right here.
And she says her old neighborhood is almost unrecognizable. She blames rapid development or gentrification that's pushing out middle and lower income residents.
There are families who earn too much money to qualify for a subsidy, but don't make enough to pay market rate or to save for that house. And I think we need to be really creative and innovative.
She's eyeing all of those new luxury buildings in the city. Developers are already required to fund some affordable housing. She wants them to pay for more, both to help would-be homeowners and renters who make up more than 80% of Roxbury residents.
But Herman says it's this next wave of gentrification spreading to the inner city that could prove combustible.
I think if anywhere we're going to see that clash, it will be in a neighborhood like Bergen Lafayette, because those neighborhoods are areas that have traditionally housed working class people and people of color, and now you have middle class people coming in from who they can't afford places even in Brooklyn or Queens or Bronx, and they're moving here and they're looking for homes, not necessarily just apartments or condos. And I think that's where we're going to see the flashpoint.
This block of historic row houses on Summit Avenue is right in the middle of one of the city's predominantly black neighborhoods. But over the last 10 years, the makeup of this community has been changing significantly. Earl Morgan is a retired newspaper columnist and lifelong resident of Bergen Lafayette. He has literally seen it all in this neighborhood.
Right, we had enormous fights with the druggies on the corner, and that all. We finally smoothed all of that away. Now some other people want to come in and say, "Thanks a lot.
We'll take it.
Take it from here." Whoa. And I have some enormous, very interesting conversations with them, because when I point this out, they'll say, "Well, you're a racist," and I say, "Look, I've been here all my life."
Why don't y'all take a look at that sign up there? See what it says? Cash for your home. You know what that is?
Billboard.
What are y'all, Amos and Andy? Are you stepping and he's fetching? I'm talking about the message, what it stands for. It's called gentrification. It's what happens when the property value of a certain area is brought down. Huh? You listening?
Yeah.
They bring the property value down. They can buy the land at a lower price. Then they move all the people out, raise the property value, and sell it at a profit.
Ray Torrado lives in the heart of New York City's largest Puerto Rican neighborhood, East Harlem.
Excuse the conditions right now.
It's one of the last affordable neighborhoods in one of the most expensive cities in the country. And it's changing, right before his eyes. In 2015, new owners announced a plan to tear down Ray's 70-year-old walk-up and replace it with a bigger building with a much higher rent. Ray, a 58-year-old construction worker, has been living here for 5 decades. It's the only home he's ever known. And now, he's the last tenant left in the entire building. The last holdout.
I did my living room floors, wooden. I've done everything here, expecting to retire here.
His apartment is rent controlled, which means he's only paying $110 a month.
This is what's actually causing the fly infestation.
Ray says the building's owners have tried to force him out by letting his home fall apart.
Okay, I don't want to go any further than that because that's going to take like a week to go down.
But Ray's not leaving.
This used to be a great view.
He's one man fighting a real estate boom, sweeping across Manhattan and New York City. The landlords didn't wait for him to leave. They've already started demolition around him.
There's lots of methods that owners are using to try to get people like Ray to no longer want to stay in his apartment. There's buyouts and pushouts, there's harassment by construction.
Harvey Epstein represents tenants who, like Ray, are fighting to stay in their homes.
What we see more often than not is owners who continue to engage in this type of behavior and get away with it because there's really little punishment for them.
He is living in a building that's 100-year-old, right? And in order to correct it, we probably have to renovate the whole building.
E. Han co-owns the property and said she's been very fair with Ray. Her company offered him $800,000 to move out, an unusually high amount for the neighborhood.
So the profit margin in it is not that big, but we really like to build something that will fit the demand of the neighborhood.
But even with that much money, Ray feels conflicted about leaving. He can continue fighting to hold on to a crumbling apartment, or he can take a check and say goodbye to his family home.
That just doesn't affect just the residential neighborhood. It affects the entire character of a community. I mean, a buyout is how a neighborhood changes.
East Harlem is a 2.4 square mile district in Upper Manhattan and home to New York's largest Puerto Rican population.
This is like the Hall of Fame of graffiti. Your neighborhood guys that are graffiti artists, and they come and push their tags over here.
There's always been a sense of community, family, and familiarity. But Ray says that's all changing, fast.
So Inglewood's seeing a phase of gentrification. We're seeing a lot of developers going in there, purchasing homes and basically selling it for a higher profit. The problem with that is that it pushes out low-income residents of Inglewood. Traditionally, people that have lived there for many decades, several generations sometimes, they're used to the city, the culture. When you have developers moving in and repricing neighborhoods, it brings in a different demographic. Several years ago, 2012, 2013, you can buy a house in Inglewood. I saw stuff selling as low as $200,000, 3 bedrooms, 2 bath. A lot of $300,000 homes were available before the stadium announcement. As soon as the stadium was announced, we saw those prices jump to 500, 600. Right? A lot of developers moved in and started fixing those up and selling them for maybe 700,000 or 800,000. I think the next 5 or 10 years, you'll see homes, and you're seeing that kind of now. You'll see homes pushing $1 million, just like they do in Torrance.
Corporations started to buy the single-family homes, and they started to buy multi-family unit apartments, whether it's small duplexes or triplexes or bigger apartments with 20, 30, 40, 50 units. And they were the ones that were gung-ho about raising the rent. And when I say raising the rent, I don't mean 3% here, 5% here. I'm talking about rent gouging. There's a difference from your landlord raising your rent a few percent versus rent gouging. The increase is so high that you're no longer able to pay the rent. It's no longer affordable. So a lot of the corporations, these corporate landlords, seen it as an opportunity to make millions, and in some cases billions of dollars, in a community where no one wanted to invest. And you can look at what's going on in New York, in Atlanta, in the Bay Area. It's the same thing. It's happening. So it's intentional. So we have to be intentional to fight back against it and say, hey, we don't want this to happen this way.